Vaush's appearance on Krystal Kyle and
that's
Friends,
a good one. Yeah, Gavin and I tuned into that on our nice Odyssey home yesterday. It was a good podcast. I highly recommend everybody tune into the whole thing, but we're going to cover the highlights.
Despite the fact that I have a lot of pretty vehement disagreements with Vaush, I did find it to be overall a fairly productive and necessary exchange. Definitely some criticisms of both Vaush's responses and also Kyle and Krystal's administration of the interview. But like you said, we'll get into that, take a look at some of the highlights. There's a few moments that I did pull from this interview that I wanted to kind of play in pretext before we get into the discussion over Force the Vote, which is the main part of this that I really want to talk about. So we can take a look at this. But again, I wanted to play some instances from this interview from before they even get into that, just to provide a little bit of context. Because in my opinion, I found some pretty shocking and undeniable, I guess, contradictions in this interview from Vaush. And I want to see if you guys pick up on these as well.
I want to get into our agreements and our disagreements, among other things. But first and foremost, I want to know a little bit about you. Tell me, like, your origin story. How did you become a streamer? What got you interested in politics and all that stuff?
God, well, first of all, the pleasure's entirely mine. Thank you. And second of all, it's all been a pretty recent affair. I've always been involved in like the online debate circle, running around arguing with folks you disagree with. And I was really frustrated because it seemed like there was a really consistent aversion to particular rhetorical strategies from people on the left online. For years and years, there were basically no socialists active on YouTube, or at least they were very sparing. And when they came about, they did mostly video essay content, which is great. Mind, I love the video essays, But the right, the conservative right, they had this incredible diversity of tactics. You could find them anywhere, from hobby channels to gaming channels to like analysis and debate, live commentary, news. They were absolutely everywhere. So I thought, it'd be fun to dip my toe in the water and show people that you can be a loud, contentious, argumentative person on the left. You don't have
remind you of anyone?
Bro,
to give all that up. You don't have to be like a hyper sanctimonious, like quiet type to advocate those politics. At the end of the day, I mean, we're all sociological agents. There's nothing inherently leftist about me. If I was born to a different set of parents, I probably could have been a conservative or a moderate Democrat or a neo-Nazi or a Ku Klux Klaner. We're all very well molded by our environments. And to condemn people morally for the misfortune of having been born into circumstances which maybe led them down an ideological path I disagree with, it doesn't do anything. The condemnation is meaningless.
The more insular language as being off-putting for the project of sort of building a larger coalition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost unworkable. It's worse online. It's better in real life, like, with IRL advocacy orgs, but it's a real problem, yeah. It's the left circular firing squad, right? The problem is the right is so good at falling in line, the whole Republican establishment fell in line to lap at Trump's feet the moment he won. Even the people, he attacked Ted Cruz's wife. There were people who said he was like a plague in the Republican Party. They all fell in line, every one of them. I don't know what it is about them, but they sure do like being lapdogs. On the left, our independent and free spirits lead to us being a bunch of infighting cats 90% of the time. And I agree with I agree too, because I think there are a lot of ways, a lot of rhetorical methods by which you can advocate for a good position. That's what I tried to do when I started this channel, because I know the way I talk. Well, it's not the way that a lot of people on the left talk online. At least I'm trying to touch on a different element, a different aesthetic there. But people attack me for that sometimes, even when they agree with the content of my speech. It's incredibly frustrating, and I can only say that I agree with that. It's a real problem.
So yeah, that's just some context on on the way Vaush and before we get into explaining this, I do want to just play this next bit, which is where they do get into Force the Vote. But yeah, keep all that in mind as we go forward.
One more area where we disagree. I'm curious to see you lay out your thoughts on it. I actually was a supporter of Force the Vote. Put Jimmy Dore aside, the idea of forcing a vote on Medicare for all in the middle of a pandemic strikes me as intuitively intelligent. Tell me why I'm wrong.
Why would I need to? You already said put aside Jimmy Dore.
That's exactly what the fuck Sam Cedar said when he had nothing to say.
So Do I think the force the vote strategy would work? Not really. Maybe is it worth some discussion? Maybe, yeah. I don't know. It seems like an interesting idea. My issue was the people, and it wasn't just Jimmy. There were a lot of others who used the force the vote as some kind of litmus test for whether you're a real progressive, and then they played up this big show as everyone who didn't go along with their plans was some sort of traitor. Like, I mean, so I say I'm not going to shit talk people who aren't here. I'll shit talk Jimmy Dore any day. So like this, here's what the guy did. Okay, not only did he do this force the vote thing, he then started a panel and a conference where he invited AOC performatively, knowing she wouldn't show up, condemned her for not showing up, saying she was ignoring the will of the people by not showing up to his show to make him money, and then said anyone who didn't support force the vote was a fraud and a traitor to the Democratic Party, held a conference that went past the last day they could have forced the vote. It was never about force the vote. It was about trying to pull off disaffected progressive Democrats.
So do you guys see the contradiction yet?
It's so obvious, and it's so painful too, as somebody who fancies himself a debater, that he's just got, and it also is a little frustrating that Kyle doesn't hammer him for this, because he has to see this contradiction here.
Well, he does bring it up in a second, and we'll keep playing this clip so you guys can see the rest. But essentially, in the clips we played previously, Vaush was talking about how we need to put aside personalities, and how, oh, wouldn't it suck, and isn't it annoying when people come after me for when I try to
present myself
for something. Exactly. Meanwhile, now, when he's asked about force the vote, even when he says put aside Jimmy Dore, immediately goes to personality shit, immediately goes to dredging up this stuff and essentially just tone policing Jimmy Dore, who, of course, we have our disagreements with as well. We've criticized him as well, but we also have a lot of agreement. And force the vote is one area, one undeniable position that was just the correct position. Again, I don't want to hear any of this bullshit. It was to, he wanted to create attention and it was performative. It was a good fucking idea, and you would have agreed to that, Vaush, if it had been brought up by any number of other people, like David Pakman, for example, who just accused you of donating to terrorists.
Yeah, and to bring Vaush's points from a little further back into this, he talks about all the time in the beginning of this interview. We just played the clip for everybody. He makes the point that he got into this space, right, because he thought there needed to be more diversity of content from the left, right? Oh. And he talks about how, you could be presenting yourself as like a vicious debate bro, as somebody who's antagonistic. You don't have to be a soft flower leftist. You could be, aggressive, the aggressive progressive, ring a bell. But anyway, he talks about how you can be all of these things and then immediately savagely attacks Jimmy Dore for being all those things that he's saying the left needs. Like, of course, of course we need diversity, right? We need a Krystal Ball for every Jimmy Dore, right? Somebody who is more of like a flower, soft, progressive. Like, I think she calls herself like a special flower in this interview when she doesn't want to bring up the fact that Vaush was a complete fucking prick. But anyway, whatever she calls herself. But anyway, so he has that whole plot hole right there. But then he also made this other kind of point that I wanted to just completely debunk, where he says the right always falls in line, but the left never does. I just want to, if I was there talking to him, I would say the left always falls in line. They just force their way into Congress first. And you cheerlead them for falling in line. So what the fuck are you talking about? When was the last time a fucking Democrat in Congress said, fuck you, Nancy Pelosi, I'm not doing what the fuck you want? Oh, yeah, it was Joe Manchin.
Yeah, 100%.
Oh, sorry, not Joe Manchin. Sorry, the Joe Manchin. But you know what I mean? That would have been Chuck Schumer that he wasn't doing.
Yeah. But it's such a great point, too, that he starts off by saying, like, I got into the scene because, all these lefties are so sensitive and weak. And I'm the only one that's able to be loud and aggressive and boisterous. And I'm bringing this energy that, people really want, but that the left hasn't been capable of producing. Completely ignoring the fact that Dore has basically been occupying that lane in this space for years now. And then goes on to bash him for exactly that, for being loud, boisterous, and aggressive, things that he says people bring up in an attempt to obfuscate from his actual policy positions. Vaush will say, oh, well, it really frustrates me when people just point to my style and ignore my substance. And then he does exactly that, while he basically tacitly admits that force the vote was a good idea. But let's keep watching, because there is a little bit more interesting, conversation here and some more contradictions too that I want to expose.
And add them to Jimmy's community. And there were other people who tried that too. For these people, I have no respect. They are doing the exact thing that we all just condemned here, which is the fragmentation, the splintering. But at least when crazy leftists on Twitter fragment and splinter, they do it because they have a sincere belief in what they're advocating for. There's a disagreement that they can't get over because, I don't know, they're sensitive or whatever. But that was pure cynical garbage, and I have no respect for it. The strategy itself, defensible, and maybe in a better context or environment.
So then why the fuck does it matter? You literally just said, if the end goal is the same as mine, I will work with anybody. So if the end goal is trying to get Medicare for all, or at least force a conversation to be had about it, then why would you not agree by your own stated logic in the same interview? It's maddening.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the only thing left to say about that is, it's completely frustrating. I don't know. You said what I wanted to say.
Maybe I would have supported it too.
So let me break this down in response. One of the criticisms I had of Force the Vote is that, yes, it was the case that if people didn't immediately agree, they were accused of being sellouts, they were accused of being corrupt. And I was if any segment I did on Force the Vote, I was very clear up front that there's no reason to malign somebody's intentions if you don't have a reason to malign somebody's intentions. So like Noam Chomsky was against Force the Vote. Does that mean Noam Chomsky is some sort of, evil sellout villain?
By the way, referencing our interview with Noam.
Shout out to the Vanguard guys.
Hey,
They say his evil mustache.
They do say
we
that.
never
Yeah,
fucking
they do.
said that.
Yeah.
So anyway, my point is, on that point, I totally agree. And I don't question the intentions and the motives of well-meaning people who just didn't agree with the strategy, for sure.
By the way, I will just correct the record. And I remember this period of time. It was mostly in a defensive posture for the most part, not in every instance, but it was mostly in a defensive posture, in which case Force the Vote supporters started, dishing out this kind of fiery response. In part because as soon as they started trying to, in a good faith way, express the logic behind this solution, people like Vaush immediately came out and started calling them grifters without even taking the idea seriously. One of our first videos ever on the Vanguard was reacting to Vaush's dog shit take on Force the Vote. Yeah. And he didn't give it any benefit of the doubt. He was not remotely charitable to the line of logic, even though he's now admitting that it was a defensible strategy. He immediately went into everyone involved with this is a grifter. That was his line. Everyone from Brianna Joy Gray to Kyle Kulinski to Krystal Ball to fucking Cornel West, who was involved too, grifter. That was his analysis.
The thing that pisses me off about Vaush is that, he is so viciously fucking critical of people, and then he'll go on their show and lick their balls. Yep. He has said nasty shit about Krystal, right? We all know it. I think he called her a bitch on one of his streams, implied a bunch of heinous shit about how she was a bad faith actor, supported Nazis, and completely just bows his head to her. Anybody that you've seen us criticize on the Vanguard, we'll broach the fucking subject with you. You're not getting out of here without it. That's why congressional people are scared of us now. But it's fucking the thing. If anybody that fucking, I can't even think of we'll have Jank on our fucking show, but he'll catch fucking smoke if he comes on here. We're not going to be like, wow, you really built a fucking progressive empire, Jank. I can't believe that you're sharing your platform with us. We'll be like, oh, hey, Jimmy Dore is on record saying that you said the following quote: "I'm not a union guy, Jimmy. You then went on to bust unions at TYT. Could you fucking explain yourself, please?" That's the kind of shit you do if you're serious. You don't go on and pretend to be friends with people that you have a vicious fucking agreement, and you don't even bother to air it out with them. People that you have taken such a fucking issue with. So it'd be like if we made a fucking show with Sam Cedar and we were like, "Hey, pal, what's up, bro? Hey, man, you're so big. Yeah, maybe we're going to get on Peacock now, bro. That'd be fucking crazy." We would never do that. We would never do that because it's completely disingenuous and it's horseshit and you lose all credibility. Okay. Do you know how many times that I've been here being like, oh, it's going to be awkward when I fucking ask this person about this thing, and then we do it anyway and it's a little awkward, but we get through it. That's how you have to be if you want to be in this space, because you have a fucking job to do. People fucking expect you to push back. And you know, and if you have integrity, and it'll fucking keep you up for days if you don't do a good enough job about it.
Yeah, 100%. Let's watch a little bit more of this.
But there was this other problem that every time you bring up the issue itself, the conversation always goes immediately back to, isn't Jimmy Dore an asshole? Isn't he so abrasive? Doesn't he have all these problems? And even if I grant you all that,
which again was the same tactic that was why some people didn't want to support Vaush's fundraiser for Palestinian people. They're like, they just didn't want to be associated with him. So they just didn't want to defend the fact that he was actually doing something good like we did. We came out here and gave full credit to Vaush for doing something amazing with his massive platform. Despite the fact that we have a lot of disagreements with him, despite the fact that he's a controversial guy, despite the fact that he's an aggressive asshole and a loudmouth, just like Jimmy Dore. We were able to, as two like fucking novices, to overlook the personality thing and give credit where it was due. That's all we're saying. That's all we wanted from people like Vaush in that moment, was to overlook the fact that they dislike some of the people involved and acknowledge a good strategy where there is one that could actually, get serious benefits for this movement, actually force a conversation to happen. So again, it's just really maddening, but
the idea on its merits, when you hear the arguments fleshed out, it makes perfect sense. I mean, for example, when it comes to women's suffrage, it failed in the House of Representatives in 1915. It failed as an amendment in 1918. It failed again as an amendment in 1919. And then in 1920, we got women's suffrage. So, like, something losing is not necessarily a setback. If anything, what you can do is fire everybody up when they see that our fucking corrupt representatives just voted against universal health care in the middle of a pandemic. And I think what was so frustrating to Jimmy is that he thinks he's doing this thing which is super noble, and he's lighting the spark that's going to set the fire, that's really going to take it to the establishment and get us health care. And then for like half or more than half of the left to turn around and be like, fuck off because you're Jimmy. I could see why he was upset by it.
My lawyers are informing me not to say anything more about Jimmy Dore.
Look of a man that's put in an intellectual chokehold. He doesn't know the way out of it. He fucking tries to make a joke and back out because he knows. And I if I were Kyle, I would have hammered him for so much more than he did right there, because he basically patted him on the ass and said, "Buddy, you're wrong," but. And he let him off the hook too. Like, how are you going to let somebody who, like, this is what he does for a living? He fucking goes off the rails. How are you not going to be like, hey buddy, time to eat some shit right here in front of 250,000 people?
I know. And the weird thing too is the other day we reported on this on the show. Kyle totally went off on Destiny for what he called unfair, bad faith attacks on himself. But in my opinion, Vaush is engaged in just as bad faith, just as disingenuous attacks on not only Kyle Kulinski, but Krystal Ball. His co-host is sitting there and nodding along and smiling. So it is a little bit, weird that there wasn't more pushback on that instance. I certainly would have been a little bit more upset if this guy was on our show and had said those kind of things about us. So I totally agree.
He said it about you, bro. If he'd said the shit about you that he'd said about Krystal Ball as your friend and as your co-host, like, he's on my fucking shit list now, and I'm going to hammer his ass and I'm going to make him look like a goddamn fool in front of my entire audience, because that's what friends do.
Yeah.
Like,
and again, it is just really insanely hypocritical that Vaush is going to sit here and lecture Dore, who does obviously get over the top and hyperbolic and all that shit. But he does the same thing. He literally called Krystal Ball a grifting piece of shit with no evidence whatsoever. And that's something he even admitted on his stream the other night after this was over, when he was doing like a recap. He was like, I'm probably not going to call these people grifters anymore because I technically don't have any evidence. It's like, yeah, you fucking don't. And you're no better than anyone else who also likes to get in the mud and sling shit and be a little dramatic, because like you correctly analyzed, that shit is what people want to watch. That's why the right has such a vibrant, independent media scene, because they're not afraid to get in the muck and have some fun with it and get in, actually hash out their disagreements. So why don't you apply that same logic to his style? And again, I'm not defending everything he's ever said, but this is just a dumb criticism. It's just style over substance. You're just refusing to actually engage with the merits of this strategy because you just want to talk about this.
It's like, you know what? And it's that exact kind of shit that we could have put it in a complete different category, and you would find it completely contemptible. It'd be like, oh, like, I'm not going to engage with this person because the way that they're presenting their ideas isn't, formatted to the structure of our way of accepting this. Like, oh, there was this old, people who like to read. David Foster Wallace was a teacher. He also wrote a lot of famous books, whatever. But one of the things that he would talk about was that if you ever want to make a big, broad point to the establishment or the academia or whatever, about how limited in scope their way of doing things is, their way of writing is, their way of communicating is, you have to fucking package it in a way that is in their system already. So in a way, you're already conforming your work. And that's why Infinite Jest is like a fucking mammoth. It's like a whole protest to that kind of thing. But anyway, that's kind of the exact critique that Vaush is doing. And it's the whole point of art and everything is that you can express an idea however you want. The whole point of writing, communicating is to get an idea across. However you're doing that doesn't really matter. It's irrelevant. You know what I mean? If I watch a fucking film that moves me to go do something, that's just as good as reading a book that moved me to go do something, right? The means of communication is essentially irrelevant. It's about the idea. It's about what we're getting at, what we're communicating. Communication is all just different ways of sharing ideas with one another. It doesn't matter if we're clicking, whether we're using sign language, it doesn't matter. So if you boil it down to that, it would be basically like Vaush being like, fuck that person. They wrote that book in Spanish. I don't like Spanish.
Yeah, exactly.
Said it there. I'll say this, though. Like, I think you can give a 50-50 on the arguments. On one hand, you can rile people up by doing this performative, because of course it's performative. It's not going to actually go through. So, but you can rile people up like optically with that move.
Hey, Vaush literally just gave credit to the right wing because, regardless of whatever, they all get in line and they all do the thing. Remember when Obama was president and the Tea Party basically like voted to repeal Obamacare? Like, literally 50 times in a row, even though they knew it was going to fail. But you know what that did? It riled people the fuck up. It riled their base up, and it got their talking point into the mainstream. Unfortunately, that was a dog shit talking point and a terrible cause. But the same logic should apply to the left and should apply to the left flank. Regardless of if it's going to fail, regardless of the fucking consequences, bring it up, do it over and over again. Just fucking have the vote and force the conversation over and over and over and over again until there is a mass movement in the street. Because without that, it's just going to get easily forgotten and ignored. That's exactly what the political establishment, the Democratic Party wants. And for Vaush to sit here and be like, oh, well, you're being too critical of Democrats when the Republicans are infinitely worse. I agree the Republicans are infinitely worse, but they're not the ones in fucking power right now. They're not the ones that have the fucking, ability to give people health care. They're not the ones with the ability to pass that legislation or even try to pursue a public option, which was in Biden's original agenda. So it's just maddening that he, again, this contradiction of, oh, the Republicans fall in line regardless of this, regardless of that. They know how to force their agenda through. They know how to get their talking points in the mainstream. Maybe the left could do the same. Oh, here comes someone with exactly that tactic, with exactly, that ability, and you're going to write it off for bullshit stylistic reasons. It's just so fucking maddening. And again, this guy, he clearly has some rhetorical chops. But when you actually listen to what he's saying for more than like 5 seconds and you actually soak in the totality of his worldview, you start to see all these contradictions. And it's just kind of like, oh, are you just saying whatever makes you sound smartest at any given moment to try to affirm whatever position you happen to be defending at the time, regardless of whether or not that gels with your previously stated values? Clearly, that's not something that affects this man's thinking, because right now we're just witnessing a fucking, spillover of contradictory garbage.
Well, it's that debate bro mentality, right? It's how can I corner you? How can I pin you to the ground intellectually? And a lot of times people get so focused, lost in the weeds, or what's it like, so deep in the forest you can see the trees or something like that. I can't remember what the fuck that phrase is, but you know what I'm talking about, right? You can't like, I'm losing my train of thought really quickly here. This is a bummer, but
all good.
Anyway, we can
do a
move
little bit more of this. Yeah, it's all good.
Yeah.
1 sec. I'm gonna grab my Ethernet cable too.
Sure.
The counter argument, I guess, would be the idea that it would make progressives look bad to like visibly block a part of the democratic process. Now, in actuality, are they blocking it? No, not really. But optically, could it be played that way? Yes, by the media to play up that process, and maybe like the media would go like, "Oh, progressives wasting everyone's time. You lost the election, buddy. Come on." Maybe it could go either way. There are optical wins and failures potential.
They're going to do that anyway.
I had is when I talk to force the vote types, they wouldn't even acknowledge the potential downsides. I guess I just get really frustrated when it feels like I'm having an argument with a demagogue. If a person can say like, hey, I recognize the downsides of this and the upsides, all that considered, I disagree with your assessment, and I would go with like the upsides. I think it's going to work out.
That is exactly the opposite of his fucking point that he made in his entire Force the Vote video. By the way, guys, you can go look at our channel. We made a video about it. We don't have to replay it here. You can see a like 1,080,000-degree turn, hard fucking turn in the tone, in the level of politeness. It's It's obvious. It's clear.
Yeah, and also he really is just being extremely uncharitable to those people that supported Force the Vote. Just because Jimmy Dore is an aggressive loudmouth that's often uncharitable to his political opponents doesn't mean that everyone that supported the strategy has that same approach. In fact, quite the opposite. As I said, everyone from Krystal and Kyle themselves to Brianna Joy Gray and Cornel West, we're big
Katie
supporters
Halper.
of this. Katie Halper. These people are not reactionary demagogues. You're really just straw manning the movement down to its worst elements, which again is the criticism he has of what people do to him, and a criticism that is accurate and valid.